Thanks very much for your time, gentlemen. This is Mike Anthony at the University of Michigan live, and uh, we have the expertise of Ron George and Larry Spielvogel. Larry is one of our we call our College of uh, Collegiate Standards experts here. Larry, I'll let him introduce himself a little bit, but this is Larry here, and he's among the people with whom we consult frequently on the fine points of codes and standards, uh, other regulatory and consortia type of action. So um, what I'll do, Larry, is let you, first I'll introduce Larry here, and Larry, why don't you say a little something about what you do? And so you have the floor now, Larry, go ahead.
This is Larry Spielvogel. I'm an independent mechanical and electrical engineer in suburban Philadelphia, and I provide engineering services to owners and tenants in buildings of all types, schools, hospitals, office buildings, even big fancy houses.
Okay, let's see. How about Ron? Do you want to say a little something? I think we've got your LinkedIn profile here.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, actually, I've been in the plumbing design profession for about going on 37 years. I'm a member of many organizations, including the American Society of Plumbing Engineers, the American Society of Sanitary Engineering, uh, the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, Air Conditioning Engineers. I serve on many committees associated with these plumbing systems. I serve on the ASHRAE 188 committee dealing with Legionella prevention. I also serve on the ASSE Legionella Research Committee. I serve on the ASSE 1071 Standard Committee dealing with mixing valves for emergency equipment. Serve on the ISEA equipment for emergency showers, eye washes, and all ASSE committees dealing with temperature controls for hot water systems. I have a website dedicated to Legionella prevention. It's legionellaprevention.org. I have a website dealing with scald prevention, and that's come from many years. For 21 years, I've been writing columns, monthly columns in Plumbing Engineer magazine, and because of that, I get a lot of phone calls from attorneys wanting me to be a subject matter expert for hot water systems and scalding and Legionella and all these things that happen. And so I noticed a lot of calls associated with scalding, a lot of calls associated with Legionella. So many years ago, I put together some websites that just show information about how to design a system to prevent these things from occurring. And it's easy to do with the technology we have now, but it's not really codified. So it's more of a thing you have to know how to engineer it and maintain it and install it properly. And that's where sometimes you have problems where you can design it, but if they don't install it and maintain it properly, you'll have problems. Or you can, install it, but if it's not engineered properly, then you're doomed from the beginning. So there's, and in maintenance is where a lot of things fall apart. You can have the best laid plans of mice and men, but if you don't have somebody to maintain it properly, that's where things fall apart. And we've had a recent Legionella outbreak in New York and the Bronx where many people have become ill. And this is, if you look at the causes of this, it looks like they're finding that it's in the cooling towers, and that's because they're not maintaining the water treatment chemicals in those cooling towers, and that's the key in those, is maintaining those water treatment chemicals. And for emergency procedures, they don't need to shut them down and clean them like they've been ordering everybody to do. You just need to dump the chemicals in there, and the chemicals will kill it and allow the air conditioning systems to stay online and not shut the buildings down. And then you can go clean them during the off season and get the sludge and everything out. But it will bring the Legionella down to very low levels, if not eliminate it, just by putting in the chemicals that need to be put in for the cooling towers. And Legionella can grow in any building water system where the water conditions are right, temperature and food sources for the bacteria. This from biofilm and scale that build up in the water. That's what the Legionella is going to grow with. So if you keep your water temperature out of the ideal growth range, and that's shown in this website here. We got the history here showing the Legionella prevention website. That's showing the history of Legionella. And if we go to, can you see this page now?
Well, no, I just need to do just some housekeeping up front, and then I'd like to turn the screen over to you, okay? So
okay.
Ron introduced himself here. I want to recount where we are with this. We actually did, we were tracking this standard among others. You know, we tracked them. You know, we deal with the better part of, you know, several hundred a year. I made some very perfunctory and statements that probably are not were not appropriate for this committee. Remember that because I advocate for the user owner final fiduciary, I'm not representing the enforcement interest. I have to repeat that. I'm not representing the owner interest, the enforcement. In the case of the University of Michigan, we are an owner, but we also are able to afford an enforcement, an internal enforcement. But I also have academic departments who are, you know, strictly what we call the final fiduciary. So I made this proposal here to hold position. Very often, I just want to make sure we got our foot in the door. This is not the kind of proposal that you make to this committee. It's basically a scope statement. It belongs to a higher level ASHRAE committee. And so I accept this as one, but I always will remind ASHRAE committees that every document has a group of people who are feel very intensely that their standard is the most important standard in a facility. And it is. It's just that a facility manager has to deal with 100 other people. If you talk to the elevator people, they think the elevator standard is the most important. But I'll remind them that, you know, you may lose a person in an elevator, but I'll remind them that if you don't have proper backflow, you can kill off an entire community basically in an afternoon with very much the same kind of bacteria that you're talking about here. And of course, you talk to the electricians, they think flash hazards are the worst thing that could happen to them. You talk to the police, they think an active shooters. So when you're dealing with a campus, how do you reconcile those? How do I make my boss's job and his counterparts elsewhere a little less like a day in the track? But what's different about Legionella, it's very politically visible right now. So I wanted to let the industry know that I felt that it was important that we get an expert here. And it doesn't take a lot of effort to know more than I do about this, but I do know the process. I do know that this is something that has to be taken seriously. So what I'll be doing is cleaning up a lot of this so that you can get referred to the local expertise. I brought Ron in at the recommendation of Larry Spielvogel, who had said that we do have some local expertise that at the very least should be known to Michigan facility managers. So with that, I will turn this over to Ron, and it will be his airplane. You ready to go, Ron?
Yes.
Great.
Okay, show my screen. Okay, here we go. This is just a quick summary of the website that I developed to just give everybody some information about what Legionella is. This is the website legionellaprevention.org. And if you scroll down here, it gives a little bit of information, and you can find out about the history. It's also got facts with myths, outbreaks, treatment, diagnosing, piping system diagrams, water system plans, risks, how it's transmitted from the system to the people. It's got information on how it's amplified. It's got some information on scalding risk dangers, because a lot of people want to crank the temperature up on the system to prevent the bacteria from growing, which is a good way to do that. But it also gives information on how to use mixing valves to temper the water down to safe temperatures. And then it's got some information on a burn chart here. And there's also another chart in here that talks about Legionella growth ranges and things like that. So let's quickly go down here. This shows the Bellevue Stratford Hotel in Philadelphia, where our colleague on the phone here, Larry Spielvogel, was an expert investigating this back in 1976 when there was a Legionella outbreak in this facility back in 1976. And why there were so many people that attended this convention that came down with Legionnaire's disease. If you look at the gentleman in the picture on the left, most of the people attending this convention were up in age, and that is puts everybody that was at that convention in a risk group that was higher. And Legionella typically attacks people with suppressed immune systems, because your immune system can fight it off to some degree. You may get flu-like symptoms, and after the flu-like symptoms, then you end up fighting it off with your own immune system. But if you have a weakened immune system, then you're going to have a headache, fever, coughing, shortness of breath, muscle aches, and then as the bacteria gets inhaled into your lungs here, then what happens is the bacteria starts growing on the warm, wet surface of the lungs, and that is like a petri dish for the bacteria to grow. Once it starts growing in your lungs fill up with fluid, then it starts causing all kinds of things, the shortness of breath, the muscle aches as the organs are starving for oxygen, and then it starts a chain reaction of other health issues. But basically, people end up with what's called pneumonia, and it's often misdiagnosed. And they say that about only 10% of Legionella cases are diagnosed. And now that people are starting to become more aware of it, then if a hospital or facility is known to have an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease in the building water system, then doctors know if somebody's got respiratory problems, they're going to test them for Legionella. So the incidences of determining if somebody has Legionella in a facility can then go up. But often it's misdiagnosed, and people just don't catch on to what's going on. There's a lot of myths here that's talking about myths about Legionnaire's disease. It's not something that you can get from coming in contact with a person that's got Legionnaire's disease, unless maybe they cough on you and you breathe in some of their aspiration. But that's a rare instance. But basically, there's an ideal growth temperature range, and that's this chart here, that the bacteria has this growth temperature range. It will grow between 68 degrees Fahrenheit and 122 degrees Fahrenheit, but it doesn't grow very fast till it gets up to, they're saying, around 77 degrees is what they've been saying lately, that it starts amplifying in its growth rate. And then ideal growth range from laboratory tests has shown that 95 to 115 degrees Fahrenheit is the ideal growth range, where it will grow at a very rapid rate. So if you have a building water system in this temperature range, which is going to include the water temperatures for normal showering, most domestic hot water system use temperatures, and also cooling tower basins may be in this 115, 110 degree range, you can have a lot of water systems that are in that ideal growth range. And that's why cooling towers, plumbing systems, and hot tubs are all going to be in this ideal growth range. And those probably are the three most popular ways to get Legionnaire's disease. And they're split about even. Cooling tower incidences, plumbing systems that are not maintained properly, and hot tubs that are not maintained properly, and swimming pools, some cases where they don't put chlorine in the pools and keep that at the right levels. But this is the thing you need to watch for, is the temperature range, and if your system has to work in this temperature range, you can deal with that with chemicals, and that's where you can, if you have enough flow through your system to keep the chlorine levels up. But in a lot of hot water systems or cooling towers, you may not have enough flow to bring the chlorine levels up, and there's a lot of recirculated water, so it can go stagnant, it can lose its chlorine, or it can dissipate over time. So then you don't have the chlorine residuals there to fight the Legionella bacteria. So in those cases, you have to add chemicals. Now, when you're adding chemicals to a cooling tower, it's easy to do. But when you add chemicals to a domestic water system, The EPA has requirements for that to be a potable water. Now you become a potable water treatment organization, and you got a lot of rules and regulations you have to comply with on something like that. So when you get into something like that, you got to look at all the rules and regulations for adding chemicals to a potable water supply. But moving on from that, this gives a bunch of information here, and it gives some warnings here about the disinfection range is over 158 degrees Fahrenheit. At some key numbers here is above 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Legionella can survive, but they do not multiply. When you get up to 131 degrees Fahrenheit, Legionella dies within 5 to 6 hours. And when you get to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, Legionella dies within about 32 minutes. And that's been determined as acceptable for most domestic hot water systems because the water will be stored in the tank for that period of time.
So
now, there are
Ron,
tank.
can
Yes.
I interrupt? So when a facility manager or organization is exposed legally, if somebody makes a claim, what are the technical arguments you make to argue against a claim or an argument that might support a particular claim? I wanted to because most of our people, my experience here is that we actually have a rather a well-staffed and experienced and well-trained HVAC group, but now everybody's terrified with lawsuits. How do you refute what might be clearly a clinical sample that says there's Legionella, and it can be directly tied to the condition of the building? What kind of legal remedies?
There's not one answer that fits all buildings because every building is unique in some way. Here's what has to happen. The ASHRAE 188 standard that was just published, I believe, in June of this year, June of 2015, it requires a building that meets certain criteria. Public building, if it's got a central hot water system or a cooling tower, or if it's over a certain size, certain height, then it's got to comply with the 188 standard. And that is a standard that is not adopted everywhere yet. It's just been published. The state of New York has just adopted. I sent you an email this morning. They have just adopted that as an ordinance, now requiring buildings in New York to comply with the 188 standard. And what the 188 standard says is that you need to have a water management plan for a facility. So you have to look at each facility and find out what's unique about that facility and what you need to do for that facility. Now, what happens in those facilities, and I'll see if we've got the plans in here in one of these. This is piping plans. But what you have to do in that facility is you have to look at all of the components in that system and find out where your hazards are. First of all, you have to put together a water management team. That's the first thing the standard says, is develop a water management team and include facilities people, engineering people, include experts on Legionella, include all these different things are listed that you should have. You should have some infection control people. There's all these things listed that you should have as part of your Legionella water management team for that facility. And you write a plan specific for that facility. And that planning needs to include a building survey that follows the water service coming into that building and basically does a flow diagram that shows everywhere that water goes in the building, and it shows the storage temperature. It doesn't have to be an exact, but it's got to show the flow diagram and show where the hazard areas are and where you can control hazards with temperatures or with chemical input or with, you can use, there's more than just chemicals. You can use copper silver ionization in some processes. You can use ozonation. There's other things, but some systems are better in certain situations. But chlorination by far is the most popular way of treating the water. If the water coming in from the municipal supply and in the building is sufficient and has enough chlorine in it, and the residuals are at the furthest points of the system sufficiently, then you don't need to do anything else. And then you can just monitor the chlorine levels at the remote parts of the system just with a litmus paper, just doing a chlorine test. If your chlorine is above 2 parts per million, you're golden.
Okay, so Ron,
even if it's above 1 part per million.
Could we back up again to the team? Does the document allow? Does that team have to be directly employed full time by the owner?
No, it doesn't say who. It can be outside consultants. It can be people that are part of the maintenance, whoever's directed to do maintenance for the facility. It says the building owner or their appointed maintenance personnel, or it could be some larger facilities have facility maintenance companies that do all the maintenance for a facility.
Okay,
so it could be somebody like that.
So it could be a
But
pool
the
of
owner is always ultimately responsible for making sure that plan is in place and making sure that the plan is being implemented. Once you develop that water management plan, and then it's got all the stuff about how you're going to control temperatures in various systems, it's going to talk about the HVAC system, the cooling towers, it's going to talk about the plumbing systems and how the hot water temperatures are going to be controlled, or if you need to add chemical treatment or whatever you're using there. It can also talk about the pools. If you have water fountains in your campus or facility, you have to maintain certain levels of water treatment chemicals in your decorative fountains or water features. It talks about the hot tubs, pools, and the minimum levels of chlorine for controlling pathogens in the water system, and there's all of that is covered in the water management plan. Then you have to have a way to implement or control. Yet during that flow diagram analysis, you're going to determine this is the point where I can control the temperature. I'm going to maintain the hot water in this tank at this temperature. I'm going to maintain the hot water system going through the loop at this temperature, and the minimum system temperature. If you want to keep from growing big bacteria in your hot water system, the minimum return temperature should be 122 or higher. And in the ASHRAE Guideline 12 Standard Committee, they have recommended a minimum return temperature of 124 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, if you use the ASHRAE hot water research sizing calculation, that's based on a 20-degree delta T or temperature differential across the entire system. So that's going out at 140 and coming back at 120. Well, now if you have to have it at 124 coming back, that means you're going out at about 144, and you're trying to maintain at least 124 coming back, and it's going to be above a temperature that will grow Legionella bacteria. It won't kill it, except in the part where it's above 131, which will be through most of the system. But it won't grow. And so what you're doing is you're going through the hot water tank. The water in the hot water tank will be pasteurized over the 32 minutes if you're storing it at 44. But if you're trying to maintain the temperature at 144 going out in the system, and you want to use a master mixing valve, you can store the water in the hot water tank at 150, 160 degrees, and use a master mixing valve to blend the water temperature down and end up with a temperature that is in the right temperature range for what you're trying to do there. So that's how that would be accomplished.
Okay. How much does it cost to keep temperature? You keep using identified temperatures. I don't know HVAC well enough. This might be something Larry can say. To speak more expert on is you identify certain temperatures, 131. What kind of a range do you have around there, and what is the cost to keep temperatures within that range? Here's
an HVAC systems. That's going to be heat rejection going from the chiller up to the condenser water and the condenser water system, and the heat being ejected out of the cooling tower. That water temperature is most always going to be in an ideal growth temperature range for Legionella. So how that is normally handled in cooling towers is they use chemical injection. They use biocides. They have a chemical injection tank with a miniature pump that injects chemicals into the cooling tower. And there's several ways of doing that. You can do it on a timer, but most of the time they'll measure the makeup water going into the cooling tower, and they'll come up with so many gallons of water. They put in so many liters or whatever of the water treatment chemical, so they maintain a parts per million ratio. So if you have a evaporation loss in your cooling tower of 30 gallons a minute, then you're going to be putting in so many liters of the water treatment chemical, whatever that works out to. You'll be putting in a few drops of if it's a chlorine or if it's a bromine or whatever they're using for the water treatment chemical. They'll be putting in that at a rate that meets the incoming water meter flow rate, and to maintain that parts per million in the cooling tower supply. And then you want to be testing the cooling tower basin water on a regular basis to make sure that you've got your cooling tower water treatment chemicals at a level that is above the level that's going to control Legionella bacteria. And I would say consult with a water treatment chemical expert, or consult with the Cooling Technology Institute. Used to be called the Cooling Tower Institute. They have lots of documentation and standards that deal with maintenance of cooling towers. And if you just follow that literature, it's going to be talking about how to maintain cooling towers to prevent Legionella bacteria growth in cooling towers.
Okay, so we'll be able to, at the end of this, and we probably don't want to go on too much longer. One of the reasons is that we struggle with very long half terabyte video files. These end up being rather large. So we try to keep them below, around a half an hour. So getting back to my question about, well, first of all, you'll be able to, at the end of this teleconference, we'll have all your data so people can get a hold of you. But getting back to the legal exposure, because that's what our managers are asking about. In your position as an expert witness, are you a person who speaks, whose expertise is more? Well, just to say, how does your expertise, are you familiar with working both sides of the issue, so to say?
No, yes. And what I do as an expert is I look at what happened and I write a report about what happened. And then if I'm asked to testify about it, I'll testify it. But basically, that's all you do as an expert, is you just report the facts as you find them. And then if you have a client that owns a building that has not done any maintenance, they're going to have a tough time defending not using biocides or water treatment chemicals in a cooling tower. That's just every cooling tower standard, every cooling tower recommendation calls for maintaining proper biocide levels in cooling towers. So that would be hard to defend, but you have to let them know that right now there's not many ordinances that say you have to do that, but industry standard, or the standard of care, is you need to do that so you don't create these plumes of water droplets that are contaminated, that are blowing all around the neighborhood for people to inhale and get this disease.
Okay. So, Larry, did you have any comments here? You've been kind of quiet. Anything you want to offer here?
Even though I'm an engineer, looking at it from the perspective of a building owner and operator, there are a couple of issues. Number one, can you trust your water treatment contractors, which most building owners use, because most building owners don't do it themselves? And from my experience, the range of capabilities of these contractors is very wide. The other issue is that perhaps only a small fraction of 1% of the cooling towers end up generating a problem. And the question is my cooling tower going to be one of them? And what are my risks, and what are the chances that my cooling tower is going to have a problem? And it's small, So as a building operator, I'm not going to worry too much.
Okay, well, it gets
Okay, I can add to that.
it gets politically visible, and that's why it's important.
I would, I would
Go
I
ahead.
would add to that just to be careful of some of the water treatment chemical companies. They have a bias towards whatever chemical they're selling, and they disregard all other water treatment methods, and they want to sell what they're selling. And sometimes they're even trying to lock you into using a certain computer program for recording information and data. So I would just say, if you're asking a salesman to design a system for maintaining your own building, you've got a bias there. Just be aware that there's always a bias when you get a salesman coming up with the solution for your facility. Now, that said, a lot of water treatment chemical companies have good experience at dealing with these issues. There's some good companies out there, and there's some companies out there that sell you snake oil, and they want you to put in all the bells and whistles and pay for the stuff that you really don't need.
Okay, well, anything else on the standard itself, Larry? I always consult Larry, and sometimes he reminds me about the standards development process itself. We understand that it's, as I like to say, an ANSI standard is better than having summer interns at the federal government writing technical standards. So even as we may approach the ASHRAE suite as one which is a very well-developed engine, consensus engine, I do respect it. There inevitably, with all standards developers, is always market making, because after all, the development process itself anticipates a balanced group of stakeholders. Of course, our mission here is that our industry does not get involved, apart from us and a couple other universities, in trying to push back at what we often think of as regulatory overreach. So we try to strike a medium. We always try to keep moving. We believe that we'll find the best solution if we keep moving and keep searching. So that's why your time with us has been very helpful, Ron. And what I'd like to do is start to close it. I wanted to, before I close it, I wanted to show you one slide that I have, which I think summarizes why this problem is likely to be more of one in the future than we think. But could you give us a little bit more about what your expertise, and more about you're having a training session on this up in Troy sometime next week. And if any of my colleagues in the area, not just the education and healthcare, but other organizations who see this video, do you want to say a little bit about what you're able to offer there for your time there? Do you feel comfortable showing your email or your website for your training session next month?
Yeah, I can try to call that up here. I don't know if you still got that on there or not.
Yep, no, we're still showing your screen.
And it's, I believe, right here. This is the flyer. And this will be a plumbing design class that will, let me think. Okay, and then this plumbing design class has this outline here. If I can zoom in on the outline a little bit here on the left side, it's going to cover plumbing codes, plumbing standards, energy and water conservation codes and standards, the LEED, International Green Construction Code, Uniform Green Construction Code, ASHRAE 90.1, ASHRAE 189.1, and we'll probably touch on 188, since that has recently taken on a new significance. Then we're going to talk about sanitary waste management system design. We're going to talk about some pipe hangers and supports, review of valves and fittings, storm drainage. Then we're going to talk about during lunch, we're going to talk about CAD and BIM and Revit and all the 3D things that everybody's moving to in the construction industry and how that's done. Then we're going to talk about cold water supply and distribution system design, which will cover all of the issues with Legionella on one end. If you have water temperatures in the Legionella growth range, if your hot water system's too low, you got Legionella issues. If it's too high, you got scalding issues. We'll talk about how you can control the temperatures to address both of those issues and have a safe water system. Then we get into water heater sizing, scalding, Legionella fuel gas systems, and then we're giving out our certificate at the end. And we have, for people that are members of ASSE, ASPE, ASHRAE, American Backflow Prevention Association, all these other organizations, they can get a $250 discount. And the class will then cost $199, which is a good deal for a full day of training. There is a registration form here, and if anybody needs a copy of this registration form sent to them, if they will send me an email at ron, R-O-N, at plum-techllc.com. My website's shown on the bottom of the screen right here. My email address is ron@plum-techllc.com. And if you just send me an email, I will shoot you this flyer, and you can fill out the application on the page 1 there and send that in and be registered for this class. And there's a $250 discount if you're a member of one of these participating organizations, and then you get the discount.
Okay, great. So
I think it's also important for building operators so that they can have more say in what's being designed for them.
Yes.
Yep. Yep. Okay, gentlemen. So I think this is about as much as our my student video processors will allow us. It looks to me you've raised about a half dozen. I've been making notes here about statements you've made that I thought, geez, it'd be nice to hear what your thoughts are. Remember, of course, that my job is to look across a span of risks, and maybe another discussion might be whatever time you have available as to how we balance our risks within a building. And that's why I wanted to close by cutting over. I will update our website with your information here and refer our colleagues who are interested in codes and standards. Remember that I tend to focus principally upon the code and standard itself and getting ideas out there. And certainly, since you're on the other side, very often you're on the receiving end of our proposals, and you voted for some of ours. You probably mostly voted against ours, but that's all. It's how it's all done. But it's important to have your point of view since you do sit on so many ANSI committees. So what I'll do is I'll cut over to myself and we'll start to close this out. And anything else we missed, Ron, I will make sure that it gets on the web page. We'll update the web page.
Okay. Right.
So I wanted to tell what we've observed, and this is data that's come in from the Energy Administration, is a lot of what we used to have on the outside is now on the inside. And we're seeing that the increase in the size of buildings now these buildings are all getting bigger in terms of average square footage. It's actually going up rather dramatically. So it becomes more important if you're going to be building these large buildings because there's some obvious economies of scale, but you also have this responsibility to have the environment safe. So I felt this was kind of an interesting piece of data to see that this problem is likely not to be going away, that more of the built environment, especially in campuses, we're very sensitive to the mixture of how large, the problems of scale you have when you're developing a campus. How big is it appropriate for a building to be? And it looks like there's upward pressure on that also. So with that, I think what I'll do is close the call again. This has been Ron George and Larry. If I can get Larry up there one more time, we'll make sure if people are interested in speaking to some of Larry about particular issues, I'm sure he'll make himself available. And I think, so give us a couple days. This will probably be up by this time tomorrow. It'll be up on our YouTube channel here in a couple places. And of course, please feel free if we can help you exchange. I cut across many different disciplines, as you can see. So if there's anything I can do to return the favor, Ron, I'd do my best to help you out in terms of trading expertise.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, gentlemen. I will see you, as I like to say, on the worldwide inner tubes very shortly. Yeah.
Okay.
Have a great day and a great weekend.
Thank you very much, Larry. Bye-bye.